Nothing the Allies had thrown at the Schnellbootbunker BY had affected it. This German naval fortress had shrugged off everything, from massive Tallboys to conventional bombs that barely left scorch marks on its impenetrable concrete shell. Yet, on a hazy February morning in 1945, 9 B-17 flying fortresses approached with impossibly narrow and almost comically long devices beneath their wings. Reaching the target, the crews released their strange cargo and watched it fall. For half a minute, fins kept the dark shapes steady as they plummeted earthward. Then came the magic. Their tail sections exploded away in puffs of white smoke, and 19 rocket motors ignited on each bomb. The weapons accelerated past the speed of sound. For the first time in the war, a concrete bunker would meet its match in a cartoon. From the very beginning, the Nazi war machine had an obsession with concrete. From buildings that housed ammunition, secretive bunkers where Third Reich brass gathered to concoct their vicious plans, strong cement walls guarded their every move. One of these sites, a domed complex near Visernus, was designed to shield the V-2 Wunderwaffe rockets as they were fueled and then fired at Allied territory. Additionally, all along the French coast, the Kriegsmarine had submarine pens with 10-foot-thick roofs, buried beneath reinforced slabs. For Allied air crews, all these facilities posed a growing problem: how to destroy a target designed to absorb massive hits. By 1944, the best answer the Allies had for hardened targets came from a British engineer named Barnes Wallis, the creator of the Tallboy, a 6-ton bomb with a streamlined casing and a hardened steel nose. When dropped from high altitude, the weapon would strike the Earth at over 700 miles per hour, burrow itself deep beside a structure, and then detonate. The resulting blast was meant to shatter the ground it stood on, while its resulting pressure wave caused foundations and reinforced walls to buckle and then break. Repairing the structural damage, if possible at all, was much more expensive than building it again somewhere else. Wallace soon scaled up his idea with the Grand Slam, an 11-ton version built for even deeper penetration and greater destructive reach. Though both weapons were highly effective against viaducts, tunnels, and buried infrastructure, they weren't always successful. But elsewhere in England, outside the world of high-altitude bombers and earthquake munitions, a naval engineer was working on a different kind of solution, and it would come from the unlikeliest of sources. In 1943, Walt Disney Animation Studios released a hybrid animated and live-action film called Victory Through Air Power. Adapted from a book by aviation theorist Alexander de Seversky, the 65-minute film promoted the idea that long-range strategic bombing could end the war by striking at the industrial and logistical centers behind enemy lines. But one of its segments stood out the most to Captain Edward Tyrrell, a Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve officer working in the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. The animation showed a bomb falling from altitude, then accelerating mid-descent using rocket propulsion to increase its impact speed. For most, this concept, animated and amped up with dramatic music and cartoon animals, was mere wartime entertainment, at a time when fun was scarce. For Captain Tyrrell, it was a eureka moment. In 1944, he created the concrete-piercing rocket-assisted bomb, also aptly nicknamed the Disney bomb. At first glance, there was nothing too graceful or state-of-the-art looking about this narrow and elongated shell with a solid core. But unlike the Tallboy and Grand Slam, which were originally designed to destabilize structures through shock and displacement, this brand new weapon was built from scratch with a clear intention: reaching high speed, staying intact while punching through concrete, and then exploding once inside the enemy structures. The weapon's unique features aligned with Newtonian physics and confirmed what military engineers already knew from field testing. The deeper the penetration, the longer, denser, and faster the projectile had to be. Following this formula, the Disney bomb measured just over 16 feet in length and weighed 4,500 pounds, with an 11-inch diameter forward body housing the warhead made up of 500 pounds of shellite packed inside a thick steel casing for maximum impact. 2 mechanical fuses were mounted at the base of the warhead, which would trigger after penetration, not upon contact. Behind that sat the second section, a ring of 19 rocket motors packed into the tail, waiting for their moment. Everything depended on altitude and timing. To activate it, the bomb had to be dropped from 20,000 feet. For half a minute, it simply fell directly toward the ground, with no guidance and no control. When it reached 5,000 feet, the tail cone split off, and the motors fired. For just 3 seconds, The entire bomb surged forward under rocket thrust, climbing by an extra 300 feet per second. By the time it struck, it was moving at 1,450 feet per second, faster than the speed of sound, and enough to punch through concrete roofs that had once been thought untouchable. The creator of the Disney bomb took the bold concept to the Admiralty, where it found early support from many members. Still, bureaucracy caused the progress to slow down. Pushing for further political backing, Tyrrell visited Lord Cherwell, one of Winston Churchill's key scientific advisors, with the hopes of getting the proposal on the Prime Minister's desk. As Tyrrell pushed to get the bomb into service, engineers at Fort Halstead, Britain's military research hub, ran trials using American naval shells against slabs of reinforced concrete. The results fed into early blueprints that quietly began moving through the system. After linking up both projects, Tyrrell took his pitch to the War Cabinet, this time with a full-scale mock-up slung under a B-17. The reaction was swift, and when the concept was met with near unanimous support, the Disney bomb was granted P+ priority, the highest urgency, short of a personal order from Churchill himself. Preparing the Disney bomb for combat required changes to the B-17, which, despite having the altitude and range, lacked the internal space to fit such a large bomb inside the bay. As a result, some models were modified to carry them externally, one under each wing, mounted on the same pylons that had been used for earlier experiments with the GB-1 glide bomb. Finally, when the new year came, Tyrrell's animation-inspired creation was ready to prove its worth. Testing began in early 1945, with motion picture cameras aboard the aircraft to record bomb trajectories and impact in order to track the results. The first drops took place over a test range in Southampton, where trajectory footage was used to calibrate the bomb sights. When the bomb's rocket-assisted profile didn't match a standard freefall path, the timing, angle, and speed all had to be recalibrated time and time again until it worked perfectly. Once finished, the bombers were redirected across the channel. However, their first target was a vast concrete structure in northern France, hidden in the woods near the village of Watten. Known during World War II as Kraftwerk Nordwest, the Watten-adjacent facilities were built by the Germans as a launch and fuel preparation site for the V-2 rocket. All of its walls were poured in careful layers, further strengthened with steel and stone. By then, however, the site had been overrun by Allied forces. Now intact and accessible, it offered a rare opportunity. A target, just like the ones the Disney bomb was built to destroy, that could be bombed and then inspected from the ground. One morning in early January, 2 B-17s approached their target, each with 2 Disney bombs tucked beneath their wings, dropping all 4 cleanly at the release point. The 4 bombs fell cleanly and disappeared into the haze below. Moments later, the silence broke. One struck the outer face of the bunker, the other slammed near a side entrance, tearing through concrete and sending splinters of steel flying. Dust billowed from the impact sites as the Royal Navy team approached, stepping through the craters and shattered debris. When the smoke settled and Royal Navy teams moved in, the conclusion was clear. The Disney bomb had passed its first real test. Despite being a United Kingdom creation, the Disney bomb would only be released by American-made aircraft and their United States Air Force's crews. In February 1945, over the port town of IJmuiden on the Dutch coast, there were 2 massive concrete pens used by the Kriegsmarine to house their prize submarines. These hardened enclosures, constructed into the shoreline and surrounded by anti-aircraft positions, were built to withstand the war in the air. Within these concrete pens, Germany kept its Schnellboote, fast torpedo boats known to Allied naval intelligence as E-boats, narrow and lightly armored craft fast enough to outrun, and stayed hidden inside these enclosures during daylight hours. At night, they slipped out into the North Sea, hunting Allied convoys running supplies into liberated France and Belgium. Alongside the E-boats, there were Beaver-class midget submarines, tiny one-man vessels capable of laying mines or launching torpedoes in shallow waters. The older structure, designated Schnellbootbunker BY, had a concrete roof nearly 10 feet thick, while the newer one, Schnellbootbunker BY, was even tougher, with its upper layer measuring 12 feet, with a secondary slab below that separated by an air gap. For several years already, mission after mission of conventional bombing had little to no effect. Not even 50 Tallboys dropped by RAF squadrons caused any damage to the facilities. On February 10, 1945, 9 B-17s from the 92nd Bomb Group of the United States Armed Forces all lifted off with this objective in mind. Carrying a total of 18 Disney bombs mounted beneath each one of their wings, and with weeks of training by the crews about the bomb's complex fall characteristics, they headed toward Schnellbootbunker BY. At the maximum speed, each of the bombs hit the facilities with a force well beyond conventional high-explosive weapons. One of them punched through the concrete roof, and another fractured a key support wall. Though the pens were empty that day, Royal Navy intelligence confirmed the roof of one of the newest German structures had indeed been breached by the Disney bomb. A second strike followed in March, this time aimed at the older AY structure. That day, only 9 aircraft carried their Disney bombs across the coast, with at least one penetrating the main span of the roof, leaving it irreparably punctured. With this, for the first time in more than 5 years of war, both Schnellboot pens at IJmuiden had suffered real internal damage from an airdrop weapon. On March 30th, 1945, 36 aircraft from the 8th Air Force prepared to deliver the largest deployment of Disney bombs yet. That morning, the target was the Valentin submarine facility near the small port of Farge, just outside Bremen in northwestern Germany. The structure had been under construction since 1943. Roughly 10,000 laborers, including prisoners of war, civilians from occupied countries, and inmates from concentration camps, had turned the area into one of the most heavily reinforced in the Reich. The site worked as the final assembly site for Type 21 U-boats, a new class of fast, long-range submarines meant to change the balance of the war at sea. Valentin's roof was 15 feet thick, poured in massive interlocking slabs, and engineered to resist anything short of direct hits from the largest Allied bombs. Only 3 days earlier, on March 27th, the Royal Air Force had struck it with Grand Slam earthquake bombs that fractured portions of the roof. Now, this renewed strike was meant to deliver the final punch, with more than 60 Disney bombs. However, only one of these devices struck the bunker itself, and it proved ineffective. Peripheral buildings around the site suffered visible damage, but overall, the main structure remained standing. For all its dramatic flair, the Disney bomb came with several major inherent shortcomings. First, the rockets were prone to ignition problems. Most importantly, though the rocket-boosted design allowed for high-speed impact, its explosive charge was on the smaller side. For it to actually deliver meaningful damage, it had to score a direct hit. Unfortunately, targeting systems of the 1940s weren't as precise. After the raid at Valentin, German engineers made limited repairs. Nonetheless, with the front collapsing and resources drained more than ever, the facility was never completed. By then, spring 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final stage. Allied forces were advancing on all fronts, and the Luftwaffe's presence in the air had thinned to near silence. Though there were still plenty of strategic targets, the urgency behind experimental or specialized bombing operations was beginning to fade. As such, after a short 7-week operational run, the final combat deployment of the Disney bomb took place on April 4, 1945. That day, 24 B-17 Flying Fortresses climbed into the calm blue skies above England, each one carrying a Disney bomb slung beneath its wings and a flight plan set for Hamburg. Across the channel, everything seemed routine until the weather began to shift. A dense sheet of overcast spread across the city, muting the sunlight and washing out every landmark. By the time the formation reached the release point, the target had completely vanished beneath a thick wall of cloud. There were no rooftops, no roads, not even the glint of riverbanks or rail lines, just a flat, featureless canopy of gray stretching in every direction. With no visual cues to guide them, the crews had no choice but to rely on their instruments. The pilots and their men flew the numbers, locked onto coordinates, and released their bombs onto a city hidden beneath the clouds, hoping the radar pilots were enough. However, none of them struck even remotely close to their target. A fifth and final operation was scheduled for May, but with the war nearing its end, it was quietly called off. By the time the campaign ended, 158 Disney bombs had been dropped across 4 combat missions. Despite the complexity of the weapon and the risks involved, not a single bomber was lost, and every crew made it back to base safely. Post-war assessments of the Disney bomb's characteristics established that the rocket boost gave the bombs a 26% increase in velocity, resulting in an outstanding 60% increase in the energy imparted on impact. But the Disney bomb story didn't end with Germany's surrender. In June 1945, with the war in Europe barely over, the Air Council formally acknowledged the Admiralty's role in developing the Disney bomb. But recognition wasn't enough. The RAF wanted proof. More than numbers or reports, they needed to see what the weapon could really do. New trials were ordered at Watten, the same bunker that was struck during the January test. Just like they'd done in the previous month, crews from the United States 8th Air Force returned to the site and dropped fresh rounds onto its concrete shell. But Vatten, battered and already studied, was too confined to offer any new figures. By then, the French government, now racing to rebuild and forget all about the horrors of the years before, pushed back hard against any more live fire experiments on their soil. 1 year later, Project Ruby, a joint Anglo-American effort, finally had the freedom and the cash flow to test concrete-penetrating weapons without the pressure of combat or the limits of wartime logistics. This was a rare chance to push the technology to its breaking point, and the targets were tantalizing. A U-boat pen on the island of Heligoland and the Valentine submarine assembly facility, both survivors of earlier raids. The lineup for these trials read like a catalog of the Allies' best and heaviest hitters. There were British and American versions of the Tallboy and Grand Slam, the massive 22,000-pound Amazon bomb from the United States, the compact M103 semi-armor-piercing bomb, and, of course, the Disney bomb. At Valentine, the bombs were dropped without live warheads to protect nearby civilian areas. But Heligoland was different. Its entire population had been evacuated during the war, turning the island into a deserted test range where nothing stood in the way. The streets sat empty. Bunkers waited untouched. And at the center stood a U-boat shelter with a 10-foot-thick concrete roof, ready to be hit again and again. These 1946 peacetime trials dwarfed anything attempted during combat. Through Project Ruby, 76 Disney bombs were dropped on Heligoland, each packed with a different explosive mix. Another 34 were used at the Valentine site, 12 without rocket assist, 22 with full motor ignition. For safety, 4 additional ones were trialed at the British testing site of Orford Ness to verify their flight path and ensure none would stray beyond the safety perimeter around the bunker. The numbers spoke for themselves. On average, during the live trials, the Disney bomb punched 14 feet 8 inches into reinforced concrete, well over double that of most conventional bombs. Under ideal conditions, it was projected to reach nearly 17 feet, a staggering result for a weapon with only a 500-pound charge. One bomb at Valentine demonstrated the extreme. It punched through the concrete roof, continued right through the 3-foot floor, and buried itself completely in the sand beneath the foundation. However, the trials also exposed that the rocket ignition system failed on nearly 40% of drops. Some casings shattered on impact, victims of steel flaws, while others struck at angles, increasing the thickness of the layers they needed to penetrate. By then, it was clear the warhead itself was too small for a complex like Valentine, which would require multiple direct hits to ensure complete internal obliteration. Project Ruby ended with a clear verdict. While none of the weapons met all operational requirements, the Disney's design and its velocity boost were a major breakthrough. Its blueprint influenced engineers in future bunker-busting bombs during the Cold War and even through the 21st century. Decades later, in January 2009, maintenance crews at the old Vatten bunker, once the site of war, but now a quiet museum tucked into the French countryside, found something buried in the roof. Lodged deep in the concrete, sealed in place for over 60 years, was a Disney bomb. Its 500-pound explosive charge was still intact. From there, the area was sealed off, and an extraction team was called in. Piece by piece, the weapon was removed from the concrete slab that had held it since the 1940s. It was boxed, transported, and delivered to the La Gueule d'Or ammunition depot near Vimy, where aging shells from 2 world wars are still dismantled by hand. Inspired by a cartoon, fired in silence, and forgotten for half a century, this singular Disney bomb ended up fused into the roof it was meant to destroy.